Good evening. Tonight's forum is being brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Alameda in collaboration with the AAUW Alameda branch. I'm Susan Hauser, serving as president of the League. Both organizations, along with their parent organizations at the state and national levels, believe that true equity for all citizens is possible if the populace is informed and viable routes to activism are nurtured. With these forums, AAUW and the League strive to give Alameda citizens an accurate overview of our police department's philosophy, procedures, and practices so that true collaboration can take place to inform cooperation, advocacy, equity, and activism in our community. Thank you, panelists, for your time and energy in this evening's program. Just a few housekeeping items to cover. This forum is being recorded and will be available on our website, LWVAlameda.org. Audio and video are off for the audience. In other words, you will not be able to see others in the audience and your audio is muted. We will not be taking questions live for this forum. We're delighted that one of our members, Michele Ellson, is taking a break from law school to serve as the moderator of tonight's program. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Michele.
Thanks, Susan, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us virtually tonight. As you know, in the wake of the outcry caused by the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others at the hands of police, Alameda is undertaking an extensive effort to rethink how the city provides policing. The city is considering changes in the types of services police provide, department policies and practices, oversight, and more. Tonight, in part one of our two-part town hall, we'll talk about the who, what, and how of policing. Tomorrow night, we'll take a look at the challenges and opportunities we face as the city considers these changes. We are joined tonight by former Alameda Police Chief Paul Rolleri, Interim Chief Jeffery Emmit, and Captain McMullen, who heads the department's Bureau of Operations. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's start with some basic questions about what police do. First, I'm hoping you could talk to us about what the mission of the Alameda Police Department is, and also of local police departments in general.
So if I can jump in and take that first one as far as the Alameda Police Department's mission statement. It's on our website. It's succinct, it's to the point, and it is to provide professional, proactive, and personable services, to collaborate with governmental organizations and other organizations within the city, to build open relationships with the citizens, focused primarily on improving their quality of life. So that is the Alameda Police Department's mission statement. Included in that is a variety of things that I hope that we get to discuss further, but that is the mission of the Alameda Police Department.
All right, did anybody want to add? Just feel free to jump in if you guys have things to add. I'll give you a second before I move on to the next question.
No, I thought.
Go ahead, Chief.
I was just going to say, I thought Matt nailed that one.
All right, thank you. So at a 50,000-foot level, generally, what principles guide policing?
I think I'll start with that one. I think at the 50,000-foot level, I think that the basic principles are fairness and equity, and being, basically community caretakers. Everything else kind of seems to fall underneath that umbrella. I think those are the things that people expect from us. They want a safe community, but they also want to know that their police department is making the city safe or the community safe in a way where people are treated the same, people are treated with dignity and fairness and respect.
All right. And generally, how would you see APD's role in the community?
So obviously, I think with everything that's going on, our role is changing, or there are people within our community, within our local government, that are looking at how that can change. I think what we have always been and will remain, even through whatever changes do occur, is that we want to partner with the community, as Captain McMullen said regarding our mission statement, in improving their quality of life. And as long as we are able to accomplish that goal, and in partnering with the community, that will never change. No matter what changes do come about, that will remain one of our focuses here at the Alameda Police Department.
If you could just sort of elaborate a little bit, when you say quality of life, can you give some examples of what you mean?
Sure. So, you know, the type of things that I think most of us, even in our own communities, would like to see improved, whether it's, you know, clean streets. You know, there's not a bunch of trash that's left around. There's not abandoned cars left on the streets. You know, being able to walk down your street at any time of the day or night and feel safe. Not having to worry about, you know, waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning because there is, you know, vehicles racing up and down your street. The things that I think all of us want to enjoy in our own communities and here in Alameda, that let us rest easy at the end of the day. You know, when we all get home from work, we want to be able to, you know, enjoy the rest of the day with friends and family, and not have to worry about those things that pop up on the day-to-day basis. That's the type of stuff that we want to work with the community members and to improve. And obviously safety being a big part of that. We want the folks who live here in Alameda and those who visit here to feel safe, to feel like they can walk down the street at, you know, 2 o'clock in the morning if that's what they choose to do, without fear of anything bad happening. And that's what we want to work with the community to keep improving.
Okay. And what do you think the community expects of you guys?
I think, Michele, what I mentioned earlier about people being treated fairly and with dignity and respect, I think that's what people expect, you know, while we're policing the city and trying to, you can't eliminate crime, but try to reduce it, or reduce the likelihood of it happening, or when it does happen, to be able to find and arrest the people that are accountable for it. And basically to be a fair spoke in the wheel, as it is often called. I think, you know, in Alameda, like in other communities too, what people expect from their police department can be different depending on who you're talking to. I know that in the 28 years, almost 29 that I was there, depending on who you're talking to on a certain day, or even at various times in my career, the community's expectations sometimes change. Sometimes that can be based on socioeconomic reasons. Sometimes it's based on race. Sometimes it's based on the neighborhood and where you live. So honestly, I think it depends. But as a former chief, and when I was a working police officer actually doing police work, you know, my whole goal was to try to be all of that, you know, try to be whatever it was that people expected from me or from us, as long as we're being fair and respectful and honest and treating people with dignity. Everything else kind of falls into place after that.
I think as far as the public, if I could make the one comment, and this is from my own perspective of being a resident of a community, when I call the police, or what I expect from my organization, is much of what Chief Rolleri said. I want people who will treat me with respect. I expect when I call 911 that a professional will show up, who will take a an outside look at what's going on and provide a service that is timely, that is accurate, and that is fair and impartial as it can be, and do anything that is in their power to, I don't want to say right the wrongs, but make the situation in which I felt like I couldn't handle it myself better. And I think that that's what our officers strive to do on each and every call. We have lots of mantras here, but one of the mantras that I initially came to endure was that we treat everybody, or are encouraged to treat everybody like they're members of our family. Like we would expect our parents to be treated, our brothers, sisters, siblings, friends, and relatives. And I think we strive to instill that in all the officers that come in the door to work at the Alameda Police Department. We're a full service police department striving to provide the best service we can on each and every contact we make.
Well, and if I could just add something real quickly as well. When I was a new officer, when I got hired by the department, Chief Bernie Matthews at the time told me that we are the Nordstroms of policing. We are that full service department that when you walk in the door, you expect to get the highest level of service you can possibly get. And I know that Chief Rolleri did the same thing. That was our goal, and it still is to this day, that we want to be that premier law enforcement agency that folks can come to us and they can expect to get the highest level of service that they should be getting. Not saying that we get it right every time. I think that's unrealistic, but that's what we're going to strive for each and every day. That we're going to give this community the highest level of service that we can possibly provide.
Well, with that said, how do you think that things have changed in the years since you started at the department?
Well, there's lots of things that have changed. Some people, I tell you from a police standpoint, we are not, we don't have anywhere near the crime levels that we used to have. Back in the early 90s, as a new officer, we used to take 16, 18, 20,000 police reports a year. And that was true into the probably mid 90s, 95, 96, maybe even 97. And then gradually things started to decline. I mean, it's hard to say exactly why that happened, but the last several years running, we have barely broken 7,000 police reports per year. Our calls for service have gone down, although not as drastically as the crime reports. Again, it's really tough to put one or two reasons on that. Why that is. Some of it is just the natural roller coaster that happens with crime all around the country. Sometimes violent crimes are up, sometimes they're down. But I think for us, that was probably the biggest change that I noticed, was just the activity level in terms of crimes change. Now, to the beat officer on the street, it may not always feel that way because you still are responding to calls that may not be criminal in nature, but it still takes up a fair amount of your time and effort during the 10-hour shift. I think those are probably the biggest things. And people like to say Alameda's changed a lot, but when you look at the population of Alameda, even when the base left, there was a lull, but a lot of Alameda, there have been some changes, but in some ways, as somebody that was born and raised there, when I come over the bridge, it's the same city to me in a lot of ways. Some good, some bad.
So jumping off of that, if I've got this right, you guys take about 60, 70,000 calls a year. Is that right?
Yeah, so 2019, which is the last full year of statistical data that we have, it was roughly just over 69,000 total calls for service, with about 6,000 of those being what we would call fire-related calls. So if somebody calls into our 911 center, but they're asking for whether it's, if there's a fire or paramedics are needed, that call initially still comes to us, and then it's transferred over to the fire side, paramedic side. But so, roughly 63,000, what you could classify as police calls. But of those 6,000 that we would say are fire-related calls, it doesn't mean that an officer didn't respond at some point. It just means the classification of the call was, it's more fire or paramedic related.
So how many of those calls would you say require a police response, of the calls that you get?
All of them?
Yeah,
All,
in some way, yeah, in some way they all do. Michele, I think, sometimes the response can be something that it can be handled with a phone call. If you're talking about a physical response where a police officer actually drives to a location and gets out of the car and contacts a citizen or a group of citizens and works through whatever the call is, it'd be harder to separate those out. But most of the time when somebody calls the police department, they're calling because they require a response, whether it's a report, a parked car that needs to be cited, a traffic issue that they want addressed, a car accident, a neighborhood dispute, a domestic dispute, whatever the case may be. There's some type of response that's required.
Well, and not tagging off of that, just kind of what you were saying in terms of the types of things you're responding to, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you're getting in terms of calls and what the department does besides, answer calls regarding alleged crimes.
So in that vein, I would say there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that folks may not be so aware of. For instance, we do sex registrations here where sex offenders have to come in and have to register sometimes yearly or in different intervals based on their housing situation. We prepare cases for the district attorney. We interview witnesses. We follow up on leads. We do a lot of things in the victim support, especially in the domestic violence arena, providing services post-crimes. We process evidence. We have to keep police reports and records. We do traffic enforcement, parking enforcement, community outreach, meetings such as this, citizens police academies. We're engaged in a variety of different things other than just responding to calls for service. We have an investigations bureau that tries to follow up on felony crimes when they occur in the city, and then we're also involved in I would label it as copious amounts of training for our personnel and collaboration. I know that Chief Emmit was in a countywide meeting yesterday. I attend them monthly as well, and we do that to try to make sure that we stay abreast of the current situations, not only within the small island of Alameda, but in the broader spectrum of law enforcement in general.
So I'm sorry, just to back up a little bit, I think what I'd love for folks who are watching tonight to get a sense of is, like what kinds of calls you're getting. So, I mean, it seems like every call is not necessarily like a murder or a burglary or some kind of crime. What are the other calls that you're getting? Because my understanding from looking at the statistics is that maybe a small percentage of the calls that you're getting are crime related. And so I'm just sort of wondering what the rest of those are.
So I would actually dispute that, Michele. What I would say is that a lot of times it's unknown what is actually occurring when we get that initial call. Case in point, last Thursday, we got a call of a suspicious circumstance where an individual appeared to have a leg injury. When the officers arrived on scene, that ended up being a shooting that had occurred, and the person had been shot in the leg. So we don't always know based on the initial call what is actually occurring. And that's why it's important for us to respond to those calls to ensure that the public is being looked after and that people are safe and secure. Now, are there times when those suspicious circumstance calls don't rise to the level of a crime that's occurring? Yes. absolutely. But those could then fall into some of those quality of life issues that we talked about earlier, that maybe an officer can intervene and provide a service to the community that can help with some of those issues as well. So just because a call initially comes in a certain way, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not police related, or that it couldn't end up being police related. And I think that's why, again, kind of going back to that, Nordstrom's, type of service, is if we never went to that call, we may have never known that somebody who was in our city had been shot. And that's, to me, that's more concerning than not going at all.
Just to tag off of your Nordstrom's analogy and the analogy of a department store, if you were to break up the kinds of calls that you're getting into different departments, the different kinds of calls, what would those look like, and how big would they be relative to the entire pie of calls?
So,
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I mean, Michele, I think I'd have to think about that and kind of part it out a little bit. But I think probably the biggest general category of calls that we get would be disturbances. Sometimes they're unknown circumstances, loud noises, arguing. Other times it's more specific. It's coming from within a house or within a business or within a car. I think some form of a disturbance is probably the biggest one that we get. Some of those turn into crimes, others don't. I think, when Chief Emmit was talking about the suspicious circumstance call, I think we get a lot of those all the time, where the person that's calling isn't quite sure what's going on, but they've heard over the years that if you see something or you hear something and something doesn't look right, to call the police. So they call sometimes and they're like, I'm not really sure what I'm seeing, but this doesn't look right, and you might want to send somebody. So I think that's a big piece of the pie. Some of those turn into crimes, some don't. And then I think traffic is a big one. And then in more recent years, homelessness calls have become a big part of what we do, or I'm going to say we and us, like I'm still there, but what the police department does every day. Homelessness related calls have increased a lot in the last five or so years, roughly. Those are the biggest ones that I can think of off the top of my head. All
right. Well, so I think we'll roll into the next set of questions about who becomes a police officer. And I'm just sort of wondering, how many sworn officers does the department have? And if you all could give us a breakdown by race and just what the roles of the folks would be.
Yeah.
So
Jeff, do you have the most?
Yes. So currently we are staffed for 88 sworn police officers, and then staffed for another 34 non-sworn, which would incorporate like our records clerks, our dispatchers, evidence technicians, administrative assistants, those folks. So going back to the sworn number, even though our authorized number is 88, we currently have 68 on paper. So we're 20 positions down. And then out of those 68, we have 57 that are actually capable of working. We have 9 officers that are off on extended leave for various reasons. And then we have 2 other officers that are off on administrative leave. So we have 57 sworn. And then out of those 57, 7 of us are considered command staff officers. So we are not actually out on the street patrolling as our daily responsibilities. So you could say that we have about 50 active sworn officers that are either working on the street or could be working on the street at any one given time.
All right. And how does your workforce break down by race? Do you have those numbers?
So I do not have those numbers. Chief,
Michele, I have numbers that were prepared while I was still there, not too long before I left. So they're not going to, these things are always a snapshot in time. So this is probably going back about 6 or maybe 8 weeks ago. So it's not going to be too far off where we are today. I can tell you, let's see, this is probably late July or early August. Of the sworn officers, we had 22%, I'm rounding just slightly, 22% were Asian, 63% white, 15% Hispanic Latino, 0% Black, again, just a snapshot in time, 89% male and 11% female. Now, I know that it sounds terrible and it's not ideal for us to have 0% of any race. Having 0% Black officers has not always been the case. In fact, that wasn't the case even a few months before then. But at that time, that was the number. Now, for us to get to a level where it matches the city's demographic of right around 8%, we would have to hire 5 African-American officers. So it's not a huge number that we would have to recruit to get there. In most of the other ethnic categories, we're pretty close to what the city's demographics are. Again, it's snapshots in time and it goes up and down. If you look at the entire department staffing, it's 23, almost 24% Asian, 54% white, 16, almost 17% Hispanic Latino, and 4% Black. And then 58% male and 35 or 36%, 58.3 male percentage and 35.4 female percentage. And that was pretty recently. I'm sure it would change just slightly if they ran the numbers today, but that gives you a pretty good idea, just a snapshot.
Okay. So just backing up a little bit, and we'll talk about that a little more in a minute, but I'm wondering what the ideal number of officers would be for a town the size of Alameda.
Again, that's go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry, I don't want to stop on it.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say that number is I don't want to say a tricky number, but it can vary depending on what matrix that you want to use to decide what level of policing that you want in the community. I think there's a system that's used that's pretty widely used in law enforcement. It's somewhere between 1 to 1.4 per 1,000 residents. And I believe right now we're well under the 1 to 1,000 residents. Probably going back 20 years ago when I started working here, we were probably closer to the 1.4 per 1,000 residents because we were at about 112 sworn. And you know, I don't know what percentage we would want to use. I think currently, right now, I think we are understaffed for what we're asking our officers to do on a day-to-day basis. And you know, that if we were at full staff of 88, maybe that would be enough. But unfortunately, over the last, what do you think, Chief, 5 to 8 years, we've had a really hard time hiring and retaining people to get up to that 88. So not really sure what it would actually look like if we had 88 sworn officers during this time that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I agree with that, Michele. I think Jeff's right. When he got hired, and actually going back to when I did, I think 111 was the highest number that we ever had, and we were fully staffed. And what you got with 111 from the police department was you had a full contingent of traffic officers, like maybe 6 or 7 on motorcycles. You had fully staffed detective units. You had fully staffed patrol units, and you still had enough people that you could have police officers walking the business districts on Webster Street and Park Street, and occasionally even out on bicycles. What you get when you drop down to 88 or 68 is you get almost none of that, and the department, almost everybody is working patrol. What we've always done is we've looked at patrol as the backbone of the department. I did that as chief. Every chief before me did that, because that's the one thing that you have to have are patrol officers out on the street. You also need detectives. You also need traffic officers. But when things get lean like they are now, those become nice to have and not have to haves. And I think right now what Jeff and Matt are currently doing is juggling a diminishing police department that is doing everything it can just to provide 24/7 patrol services, and some of the other stuff is falling off to the wayside. Traffic enforcement, we don't have officers walking beats. We don't have officers on bicycles. It's a real struggle to do that, and it affects community policing initiatives. It affects relationships that we have with the public, because the officers just frankly don't have as much time or ability to be interacting outside of the calls that they're going on. And it's bad for everybody. It's bad for the PD. It's bad for the public.
And if I could just add to that or expand a little bit, I think it's critical. I think that staffing, as the chief just concluded, the worst part about diminished staffing is the strain it puts on our relationship with the community. And the more I learn, and hearkening to the 21st century policing that Barack Obama's team put out, it's all about the legitimacy, and the legitimacy is built through relationships, and relationships take time, and they take cultivation, and they take work. Regardless if it's a personal relationship or a professional relationship, and those things get strained when numbers get to where they are. Not having enough or adequate people out on the street to build and forge those relationships, to cultivate them, is causing some setbacks, and we want to correct that as quickly as we can with the right people in our workforce, the ones that want to go out and build those relationships with the community. And to that point, we had people like Chief Rolleri who left a void. He was with the city for I want to say 28 years, Chief, and
yeah.
And in that time, you build relationships with people. You get to know them. You get to know their character. You get to know their needs, their wants, and their aspirations. And to provide that level of service, to improve quality of life for the residents, we have to know them. And in order to get to know them, we need time. And right now, we're spread so thin. We're just trying to keep afloat, to maintain any feeling of safety that we can for our residents.
Well, and let's talk about that a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry. Feel free to go ahead.
The one other thing I was going to add to that is, and what Matt said made me think about it. If you looked at the department roster now, and I haven't looked at it for a little while, but there are people like Jeff and like Matt who have been there for near 20 years or over 20 years, but the number of people who have been with the department for that level of time, for a variety of reasons, some of those folks are basically aging out, they're retiring, and they're moving on. And what we have is a younger police force who maybe there's a lot of folks who only have 6, 7, 8 years on, maybe if that. And so the notion of time and building relationships and getting to the point where, where you're driving around, that people actually wave at you because they not just because you're a police officer in a patrol car, but because they actually know that's Paul, that's Jeff, that's Matt, that's Michele that they're waving at. That takes time, and it doesn't happen overnight. And when you work, when some of those folks are working midnights and they're driving around from 9 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock in the morning, very few people see them for a while. So that stuff does take time. And when you have the senior folks like me who move on, after 25 or 28 years, those are voids that take a long time to fill. Not necessarily because, I was great at it, but just the time that it takes and the experience that you have in the community, it just takes time to build that.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. You guys talked about how you are staffed for 88. You've only really got 57 folks who are active at the moment. You used to be staffed at almost twice that level. Can you talk about how we got here and why there's this discrepancy between the amount of folks you have and the amount of folks who you could have?
Yeah, so going back about 10 or 12 years, when not just the city of Alameda, but I think the country in general was experiencing some budget issues. The economy wasn't that great, and we, along with everybody else, had to adjust. And over probably the span of about 6 years or so, we started cutting positions from the department to where I want to say by 2009 or 10, we were staffed for 96. So we had lost about 5 or so positions. And then I want to say by 2011 or 2012, Chief, is when we went to the 88 number, when we were still dealing with some budget issues in the city.
The last time, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on that. So yeah, Michele, 23 of those positions we were evaporated in budget cuts over an extended period. So at various times, as various versions of the council were doing budget preparations, the police department got cut back. So from 111 to 88, which is what we're authorized now, those positions, those 23 positions, basically were just taken off the table. The last time that we had a reduction, it went from, as Jeff said, it went from 92 to 88, and I want to say that was almost 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. Sometimes it runs together for me, but we had it was right around the same time that we, in addition to cutting 4 positions, which were 2 in motors, 2 in the traffic division, and 2 in detectives, we also shut down the animal shelter and went into the partnership with FOZ, and we also closed our jail. So people who've been in or around Alameda are paying attention to that for a while. Those are the last big cuts, which I think for us were like 5 or 6% of our budget at that time. But we've been at 88 for about 8 to 10 years, and in terms of authorized, we haven't been at full strength that entire time.
So I'm just wondering, why haven't we been at full strength? What's been going on that we haven't been able to get there?
So there's a few things, and then I'll let Jeff and Matt give their opinions as well. But and I apologize for making references back to when I was a baby cop, but when I tested to join APD in 90 or 91, there were probably 500 people there at one time to take the written test in the cafeteria at the old and now new Alameda High School. And that was to fill 4 positions. Now we have just the sort of the opposite effect, where we have, 20 or so positions that we need to fill, and the applications just kind of tend to trickle in. There's a bunch of different reasons for that. It's hard to put weight on too much weight on any one of them. Sometimes it's the economy. I mean, police officers are paid pretty well at the entry level for not being required to have a college degree generally. But when the tech bubble was booming a few years back, and you could go work for Apple or Google or Microsoft or whomever in the tech world, you could get paid a lot more money and not have to work nights, weekends, holidays, carry a gun, and do dangerous work. And frankly, it wasn't that attractive to people because they had other options. Now, I think in recent years, I'll go back 5 or 6 years. There's been, I think, sort of a gradual lessening of people's interest in getting into the career because of negative portrayals of policing, because it is still a dangerous job, even in a small-ish town like Alameda. We're actually considered a mid-size agency in California. And when you have other options that don't require you being away from your family on holidays and nights and weekends, people tend to take those, and it's hard to blame them. And I think that's something that we still struggle with today. There are upsides to it, the medical, the fact that there's still a pension out there, which pensions are almost extinct, except for in government service. So there are some upsides, but I don't think right now that those outweigh the downsides of working in public safety in a 24/7, 365 environment.
And I will say, as I was referencing an article I read from the Police Officers or Police Executive Research Forum entitled "The Workforce Crisis and What Police Agencies Are Doing About It." I will just add that this isn't an Alameda problem specific to our island, but this is a national problem, one that rises to the forefront of most discussions at the national level of conventions or police trainings of what we can do to recruit a more diverse and robust workforce in today's day and age.
Well, let's talk about recruiting a little bit. Jeff, did you want to jump in before we jump?
No, I mean, everything that Chief Rolleri and Captain McMullen touched on, those are the issues that it's not only plaguing us here in Alameda, but it's across the nation. It's not popular to be in law enforcement, and because of all the things stated before, a lot of folks, especially younger folks, don't realize that when it says 24/7, 365, that actually means you might be working Saturday night instead of hanging out with your friends and family, and that's kind of a reality check for some folks.
Yeah. Well, so in terms of recruitment, when you're recruiting, what are the requirements for becoming a police officer?
So there's minimum requirements, Michele, and then there's desirable requirements. So minimum things are like you have to be 21 or 20. You could actually get hired theoretically at 20 and a half years old, but we don't hire anybody that's under that age. You do not in Alameda at this time we don't require a college degree. Those are preferred if you have some college, at least an AA, but it's not required. You have to have a not a squeaky clean, but ideally you don't want to have any disqualifying convictions. So, for example, a felony conviction means you cannot be a police officer. A sexual assault conviction means you cannot be a police officer. Bank robbery, selling narcotics at a felony level means you cannot be a police officer. You can be a lot of other things in your life, but you can't get through the door in that job. The state sets some standards, and then there's some leeway for individual departments to evaluate their candidates based on certain sets of circumstances. So for example, if somebody had a misdemeanor theft or a DUI that happened 6 years ago, but nothing happened since then, we would at least consider them. But certain things are automatic disqualifications. Domestic violence, I left that one out too. That would be an automatic disqualification. You cannot be a police officer in Alameda or in California. So that actually, I mean, when we're talking about other reasons why, you know, it's hard to fill positions, that's another reason. Sometimes we get applications from people who want to be cops but shouldn't be, and we screen them out early on. And so that's another reason why, you know, we have vacancies. And I think I probably am speaking for Jeff and Matt to say we'd much rather have the vacancies than to make a bad hire.
Well, and you mentioned when you're hiring, there might be things that you're looking for above and beyond that list.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I mean, I mean, as a chief, I like seeing young men and women who are coming up who have done, you know, been out of the house for a while, which sounds funny, but in California these days, you have fewer and fewer people who've actually been able to move out and get their own place, who have maybe been in the workforce, not necessarily in law enforcement, but been in the workforce, had an education, volunteered, done something. It's not unlike when colleges are picking students in a competitive environment. You know, you want to try to get people that are well-rounded and have diverse backgrounds. It's, you know, I can hear people snicker when I say it, but it's true. We're not looking for a bunch of cookie cutter robots. That doesn't make for a good police department. I'll let those guys add to whatever they want to say. I feel like I'm
covered it all, Chief.
I think the chief really nailed it on the head. We want dedicated men and women from a variety of backgrounds and experiences to come in here with a true desire to help our community become better, be better, and be a safer place to live, work, and play. And at times it is challenging to find those individuals who have a sincere desire to want to sacrifice all the things that we've talked about for total strangers, at least on the onset. Hopefully they'll build those relationships and they won't be strangers when they make it to retirement. But on the onset, it is most likely all of those things. Sacrifice your time, your holidays, your family life, at times to serve. And at times that could be challenging. I recently watched former FBI James Comey give an address to Georgetown, and he was talking about the diversity and trying to hire a diverse workforce. And he said something that really stuck with me, and I want to share it here. That he said it's not only a matter of morality, but a matter of efficiency that we hire a diverse workforce. But as Chief Rolleri said, I'm very proud to say that we are very selective in who we hire, and there's reasons for that, because we would much rather weed them out on the front half than have to weed them out on the back half or have something end tragically. But we desperately want to diversify our workforce. We want to grow our workforce, and we want to have the dedicated employees that the Alamedans deserve working here at our organization.
Yeah. And I think when we talked about earlier how it's, there's a pretty large gap in what we're authorized and what we currently have. And, a lot of folks that want to, or that start the process when they realize that they're working shift work and holidays and weekends and nights, it turns them off. But the folks that are here, they're here because they want to serve. And the reason, the having to work weekends and holidays and nights, that didn't deter them from continuing through the process. We actually have a lot of people that will remove themselves from the background process because they don't want to do those things. And those are the folks that we don't want working here to begin with because they weren't motivated by service. I think it's safe for me to say that all of our employees are motivated by serving others. And those are the folks that we want, and they're out there. And we may need to find some different avenues of how to bring those folks into our department. But that is the key component to having a successful law enforcement agency is having a group of men and women that are dedicated to serving their community. And sometimes not even their community, but the community that takes a chance on them to allow them to serve. And I think that is that's what we're looking for, and I know that's what other agencies are looking for, and it's a very, very competitive market right now.
Yeah.
Well, and let's talk about that a little bit. I'm just wondering, and Captain McMullen, you spoke to this specifically. What kinds of things could the department do to recruit a more diverse force?
So speaking from experience, and this is dating it 4 or 5 years, but I know that when I worked in the personnel and training section of our police department, Chief Rolleri and I made it a point to sit down and try to find job fairs that targeted specific diversity outreach. I know that we advertised in a variety of different places that targeted making sure that we are reaching all segments of society. I know that we did things intentionally in our advertising in Facebook to make sure that we were meeting certain demographics and outreach to do and touch certain communities. To say they were successful, I don't know. Obviously, there's still much more work to be done. And like Interim Chief Emmit had mentioned, it's a competitive market right now. It truly is. We've gone to colleges. We've spoken to a variety of different groups in that setting, trying to find folks that have some education that are looking to enter the job market. And it is really a tough go, but we've tried things. We'll continue to try things, and we won't give up until we can diversify what our agency looks like. And I know that we have made strides, especially in the numbers of female police officers that we had has increased exponentially since I've worked here, which has been fantastic. I think we've really made some progress in that arena, and we have some other areas that we have some room to grow.
I think a big thing for me that I'm hoping we can continue to do, because I believe we do this now, is the best recruiting tool are the people that already work here. When our officers are out on the street making contacts every single day, sometimes upwards of 50 or 60 folks that they're contacting on a daily basis, they're not only representing the city of Alameda, but they're representing the police department, and how they represent themselves is a recruiting tool. And I am hopeful, and I know from a lot of the conversations that I've had the opportunity to enjoy with more of our community members, is that a lot of folks are happy with the service that we're providing, and that they're very complimentary of the officers in the work that they do. And my hope is that they're sharing those stories with their friends and family, and then they'll share those stories with more friends and family. And if there's somebody out there who's interested in law enforcement, they're going to remember that, hey, Alameda PD, they had a good interaction with the family member. That's the place I want to work, because they treated my family the way that I would treat them. And that's I think our biggest recruiting tool is the people that we currently have.
All right, well, let's move on to training. And I'd like to know a little bit more about what kind of training police officers receive, how much, what kinds of things are officers being trained in?
So from the 50,000 foot level, there's all kinds of training that occurs in policing. It starts in the police academy, and then once you're out of the academy, it continues when you're in what we call field training, the field training program, or field training officer program, FTO for short, which is the first 16 or 18, actually it's probably
19.
20 weeks now, 19 weeks after you're out of the academy, where you're training with another experienced officer on the street. And then you have continuous professional training that is most often mandated by the state of California. It's actually mandated in law. And then there's other training mandates are based on, liability issues or at local discretion. So it depends on what stage of your career, and then, whether you're doing state mandated training, any federal mandated stuff, or local related issues. So there's all kinds. I mean, I don't even know if we have enough time to go over. I don't have a list in front of me, but there's an exhaustive list of, and it's hundreds, if not a little over thousands of hours between the police academy and then when you're doing in-service training.
So just when we're talking about hours of training, the police academy, I believe, is around 1,060 hours right now. And then if you take just the bare minimum of our in-service or our field training program that every officer that has to complete, that's another, again, at the bare minimum, 760 hours. So you're looking at 1,800 or 1,820 hours of training before that officer is even allowed to be in a car and respond to a call for service on their own.
And then you guys have ongoing training as well, correct?
Yes. Yeah, a lot of that is state mandated training through POST, Police Officer Standards and Training. And there's a few categories that are mandated. Firearms, driving, defensive tactics. I don't know if they still call it tactical communication, but it's more along the lines of de-escalation type communication. And those areas are required for every single sworn officer. And they do a 2-year training cycle. But we go above and beyond that with the training. Right before he retired, Chief Rolleri got us set up with some department-wide training for the entire department related to the changes in the use of force policies from the state law changes that came out and that are coming out next year. A lot of that has to do with de-escalation training, looking at use of force from a fair and an unbiased position, mandated reporting, that type of stuff. Our crisis intervention training, I believe the state mandate is around 16 hours for each officer. We do 40 hours of training for every officer for crisis intervention training. So we have always been a department that has gone above what the minimum requirements are.
Michele, I would just add, like, in addition to the state mandates, so when Jeff mentions the crisis intervention training, and then the other one that we didn't talk about yet was implicit bias training. And I heard anyway that the council was, at least their city was considering using a different firm to do some implicit bias training. What a lot of people may not know, but you could find out if you Google it, is that Alameda PD went through implicit bias training a few years ago. It's still to this day not mandated by the state of California for police agencies, but we put everybody or almost everybody, I think it was like 95 or 96% of the department through some implicit bias training, and it was not by the company that people are upset about during the current conversations. And then we've been doing crisis intervention training since 2008. And that's the 40-hour course that Jeff alluded to. It's a popular course. Other departments have their people going to it. We are only allowed two class spaces per session. And they only run a few sessions per year. And now with COVID, it's been, at least for now, it's been completely shut down. But we had put, just up until just before I left, we had put 72 police officers through that crisis intervention training. And so I think 76 through the implicit bias training. Now, some of those people aren't there anymore, myself included. But of the people that are still at APD today, 56 of the current sworn officers have been through the crisis intervention training, and 61 have been through the implicit bias training. And that, again, neither of those things are mandated by the state.
Okay, so it sounds like what you all are saying is that there is certain training that's mandated by the state, but you are able to add training in as it is available. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and affordable. You know, training budgets, and we didn't talk and during the recruiting thing. You know, recruiting budgets, those also dictate how much and how far you can go sometimes to get those things done. So I'd be foolish to not say that money matters when it comes to some of that, but not that the state mandated stuff is no problem. But when we try to do some of the extra stuff every once in a while, there are some costs there that any police administrator is going to have to be cautious of, so that you're not creating an undue financial burden on the city. You really got to pick your spots.
Okay. So let's move into how officers do their jobs. What is a day in the life of a police officer? What does it look like?
Go ahead.
I think all three of us are laughing because it's been quite some time since any of us have probably gotten a black and white police car and hit the street for a full 10 or 15 hour shift. But I'll try to touch on just some of the highlights. It's changed quite a bit. I think technology has changed quite a bit. Going back to a few questions before of what you asked, or when you asked what has changed. When I first started, it was carbon copy paper and a lot of police report writing, more than I had ever expected. But an average day would look something like you would come to a briefing where some information from the previous shift is probably shared. Some of the important things of the day are shared in that briefing. You'd go check your equipment. And then you would log on to service, probably checking the calls for service. When there are more calls than police officers and they have to be triaged, they get stacked onto a board. So I would presume that most police officers are checking that on a mobile computer in their car, responding to calls for service, providing aid to those who need it and require it, and then doing proactive enforcement, whether it be traffic enforcement. We call them PWTs, or park walk and talks, that we strongly encourage our officers to engage in throughout the day. But most of it is answering radio calls for service when dispatch receives those calls based on a priority ranking, responding to those, and then without sounding too mundane, documenting. Police officers write a ton of police investigations. Everything we do is now captured on a body-worn camera that we either wear on our shoulders or on our chest. But moreover than that, we're preparing police reports either to file for the district attorney, for a supervisor to read, documenting what we have done through our 10-hour shift. And so I would say that that's a fairly accurate of a day-to-day. There's no routine, but I would say that that is typically how it goes for an officer.
All right. And are there any particular policing models the department uses? Captain McMullen, you mentioned Obama's 21st century policing. A lot of folks have talked about a community policing model. Are there any particular models the department uses?
So the current setup that we have is it's a priority call setup where we have typically one officer per what we call sectors within the city. We have 5 of those sectors, and it's the calls are sent out on a priority basis. You know, if we had a barking dog call versus a physical fight that was occurring, the physical fight call is going to be dispatched prior to the barking dog call. I would say from a philosophical standpoint, we are a community policing organization. We are trying to interact with our community to find their needs and wants, and then to fulfill those. As we've been talking about staffing and staffing levels, that can be very difficult to do. We have to have officers that are available for priority calls for service. And it's hard to get the officers out of their cars and not handling those priority calls when you only have a very limited number that are working the street during any given time. But we are driven by what the community is expecting from us. You know, what service are they in need of? That's going to be our driving force. But again, just staffing can really hinder that type of response.
All right.
Yeah. Michele, something I want to jump in on it. I was thinking about it while Jeff was talking. Is one of the things that the department's done, and Jeff had and Matt had a big role in this, was building up a once robust police service technician program that kind of took some hits over the years, where we had non-sworn people who maybe are going to college and might have an interest in a career in law enforcement, or they're just looking for you know, some extra work experience and money, and they're available to take what we call cold reports, so not in progress, where suspects aren't known, things that can tie up our dwindling resource of actual sworn police officers, to free up officers to do more of the stuff that I think people are counting on the police to do, and not so much being tied down on some of the cold reports. It's not to say that it doesn't happen, but and Jeff, you could tell me how many you have now, but there's I think we're 6 or 8 youngsters who are young adults who are helping us out immensely, taking some call reports and freeing up police officers to do actual patrol and take priority calls.
Yeah, and it's a great program. It's actually how I got into the profession and how I was hired eventually here at the Alameda Police Department. When I was attending college, was taking some classes, and one of my criminal justice instructors encouraged me to hire or to apply for the Alameda Police Department for a non-sworn part-time position. And it was a great way to see firsthand kind of behind the curtain of law enforcement, and to get a real experience of, you know, is this the profession that I wanted to get into? And they're a huge help. Just like Chief Rolleri alluded to, they can alleviate some of the pressure that our sworn officers have in, you know, allowing the non-sworn folks to handle some of the lower priority or, you know, some of the cold reports. So those sworn officers can get out of their cars, they can walk the neighborhoods, they can walk the business districts. They can be more readily available for the priority 1 calls for service. It's a great program, but it is part-time, and they are, you know, college age. So, you know, we don't always get to hold on to them for as long as we would like. But it's a great way for us to help alleviate some of the staffing issues, and to give some of the younger folks a look at the profession as well.
It also contributes to us having a uniformed and professional but unarmed presence out in the community for certain calls too. because frankly, every once in a while we'll hear it from somebody that, you know, calls because their bike was stolen off the back porch 2 days prior, and it doesn't happen often, but it does happen where they'll be upset that an armed police officer shows up to take the report. And so sometimes it alleviates those kinds of rubs in the community where an unarmed, uniformed professional person comes to take that report.
All right. And one last question in that line was about supervision. Just to kind of tie up, what kind of supervision do your officers get?
In a nutshell, well, the model's changed a little bit. We generally, you'd have for every, let's say 6 or maybe 7 officers, you'd have a supervisor, which would be a police sergeant supervising patrol officers. So you might have, let's say you have a team of patrol officers, 5 or 6 officers, they'll have one sergeant supervising them. Starting from the top at the chief's office, the chief supervises the 2 captains. The 2 captains supervise the 5 lieutenants, and the 5 lieutenants basically are responsible in some way, shape, or form for the supervision of the 15 sergeants. And then the 15 sergeants supervise the remainder of the department, whether that's the sworn or non-sworn. Now we have people we have record supervisors who are not police officers supervising records clerks who are not police officers. But at the police rank, as far as the badges go, that's how it works. The chiefs over the captains over the lieutenants over the sergeants, and the sergeants over the officers. But I don't think anybody supervises more than about, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, maybe six or maybe 7 at the most.
That's what it probably should be at, but because our numbers are so low, it's probably down around 4 to 5 officers per 1 supervisor. You know, one of the things that was really thankful, Chief Rolleri never allowed that supervisory number grow larger than it should have. And I think if you look at a lot of other law enforcement agencies, not necessarily here in the Bay Area, but across the nation, a lot of times where they're getting themselves into trouble is that it's the supervisory level to the number of subordinates is way too high. And we have always done a good job of trying to keep that number down so that the level of supervision or the oversight is where it should be. And you know, all of us having been patrol supervisors, you know, it can get challenging if you're trying to oversee, you know, more than 6 or 7 police officers. So it's a good number to have.
And Michele, one thing I would add to that, to the supervision level, is that, you know, obviously everybody can't be there all the time. So the captain's days off are staggered so that, you know, one is off on Monday, one is off on Friday. When they're both off on the weekends and the chief is off, there's usually at least 1 lieutenant that's on duty over the weekend. And there's never a time at any day of the week or any hour of the day where there isn't at least 1 uniformed, sworn patrol sergeant supervisor on duty with the officers. You will never find a time when there isn't at least 1 supervisor there. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, if there's only 4 or 5 cops on the street, there's a sergeant on the street with them. And they're also supervising dispatch to the extent that they can be in and out of the building. But there's never a time where there is not a supervisor on duty. Now, they might be tied up on a call, but there's always at least 1. And depending on the day of the week and the time of the day, there could be multiple.
All right. Well, when we talk about what are they doing?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit there. I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, what's their role? Like, what are they doing as supervisors?
So a big part of their role is administrative oversight. So like Captain McMullen had touched on, you know, our officers are writing, basically everything that they do gets put into written form. I say written form, it's not, you know, they're not handwriting, but So police reports, whether they're crime reports, incident reports, you know, every single report that comes through our department is initially reviewed by a supervisor. So that's one of their functions. The other function is to, you know, watch over the officers that they supervise, to show up on their calls for service, to be available to answer questions, to deal with members of the public who may want to come in and speak to a supervisor about a way that a call was handled. You know, other administrative duties if they're you know, like Chief Rolleri alluded to, if they're the nighttime supervisor, they're responsible for everybody that's in the building. So, you know, they may be walking through the building to ensure that, you know, the folks who are inside are doing well. So there's a wide range, but what we want them to be doing is to be out on the street with their officers, engaging with the community and ensuring that our officers are living up to the standards that we have here. That's their primary.
And then, Michele, could I, and if I could just,
right.
could I just add that really briefly? The supervisors on the street, and I think probably a lot of your members when they tune into this are gonna wonder about this. So when a patrol officer makes an arrest in the street, whether it's a citation arrest or a custodial arrest, where the person is actually going to be transported to the county jail, the supervisor is advised of and ultimately approves all of those arrests. So some are super routine, like for example, let's say somebody gets arrested for driving with a suspended license. That's not very complicated and it's a pretty easy advisement. Other things could be more complicated, depending on what the crime is. The other thing that they do is they review if there's any use of force on a shift. Then the supervisor arrives at that scene and begins what is a larger administrative investigation of every use of force. So there's never a time when someone is not available to be overseeing and supervising those types of events.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we look forward to asking you some more questions in part 2.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you.